the 50-plus champions, the midlife MOT, the sector-based work academies, the skills boot camps specifically for over 50s, and more particularly the mighty Port Vale Football Club held a fantastic recent jobs fair where there were 1,400 customers who attended, including many over 50s. 600 job offers resulted, and there were 100 employers present. That's the sort of thing DWP is doing.
Mr. Speaker, and as the recent British Volt investment shows, the North East has real strengths in growing sectors like battery technology, green energy, life sciences. Does the Minister agree with me that it is not possible for nationally controlled training programmes to really support people into employment in these emerging sectors, and will he therefore devolve responsibility to local areas who know local skills and local opportunities?
Local DWP job centres work hand in glove with local employers. It is very different in Banff than it is to Brixton. It is very different up and down the country, and that is what we do with sector-based work academies, skills boot camps, innovation pilots as well on a local basis in each individual job centre, Mr. Speaker.
Robertson.
Mr. Speaker, I co-chair the All-Party Parliamentary Group on Engineering, and one of our objectives is to get young people to consider taking up employment in engineering. A number of companies in my area, for example, are short of young people. So what more can the government do to make young people aware of the excellent opportunities which exist in engineering?
Mr. Speaker, supporting young people into STEM projects and careers is a focus across government. A new science and technology framework has been announced today, vital for long-term economic success. DWP Train and Progress helps claimants take advantage of DFE's boot camps, and our partnerships with Google is helping boost digital skills. These can be flexibly done at any age and career stage.
Justin Mabbers.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further to the question from an honourable member for Strangford, I've got a constituent who is facing an ESA overpayment at the moment, despite the fact that she's been able to show she gave the department the correct information time and time again. That's frankly, according to the department, irrelevant about whether she should repay the full sum or not. If the department have no comeback on them for making mistakes, how will they ever improve?
Again, I'm appreciative to the honourable gentleman for his question, and it is important to note that official error loss has fallen from 1.3% in 2019-20 to 0.9% in 2021 to 0.7% in 2021-2022. And of course, it is right that we work constructively with individuals to identify appropriate repayment plans, making sure that we live up to our legal obligations to get this money back into the department, but I would expect officials to work constructively with people, reflecting their specific financial circumstances, and I'd be delighted if you shared the details with me to have a look at this.
Drummond.
Mr. Speaker, and what steps is the Minister taking to raise awareness of the impact of the menopause amongst employers?
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the Honourable Lady takes an extreme interest in supporting women in work, and working with employers is crucial to ensure that they can both retain and recruit women, and there is no stigma in the workplace for those experiencing the impact of menopause. Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to announce to the House the appointment of Helen Tomlinson as the DWP Menopause Employment Champion. Helen will have a key role in driving awareness, promoting the benefits of to both business and the economy of a fully inclusive workplace, and I'll be sharing further details later today.
Research by the Bevan Foundation established that local housing allowance is not a solution to the cost of living and housing crises for families on low income and the most vulnerable, because the allowance is too low and has been frozen since 2020, whilst private rental costs have soared. Will the UK government help those in need and uprate the local housing allowance?
Mr. Speaker, we do recognise that rents are increasing, and a challenging fiscal environment means that we need to support people effectively, and that's why we have announced a support package for the most vulnerable households, including support through the Household Support Fund. And for those who are entitled to housing benefit or the housing element of UC who do have a shortfall, they do need to reach out for discretionary housing payments via local authority.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now, I have some fantastic businesses in my constituency
agency of note, Argus Fire and Pegasus. They do a brilliant job in recruiting young adults and providing career opportunities. What more can the department do to bridge that gap between employers and young adults to make that one-stop opportunity for anyone aged 16 to find employment?
Mr Speaker, you know I'm very supportive of young people into work, and the Dudley Youth Hub is a classic example of DWP working in partnership locally, a single location for employers to engage with the under-25s from Stourbridge and the wider area. And it means that claimants can come to recruitment events alongside a range of on-site services, and I know they very much welcome the opportunity to work with the Argus Fire and Pegasus group.
Callaghan.
PCS members in Scotland get a raw deal from this government on pay,
Yep.
with many civil servants themselves using food banks. When will the government give them a proper pay rise?
Well, Mr Speaker, the Honourable Lady will know that we are in positive discussions with the PCS, as I outlined earlier. The point has been made that many of those who work within DWP are on the national living wage, and that will increase by 9.7% as of this April.
Andrew Jones.
Mr Speaker, working with Disability Action Yorkshire, my constituency, I've seen the important and growing role in the job market played by people with disabilities. I've spoken previously about the Access to Work scheme. Can the Minister update the House on what is being done to promote this excellent scheme amongst employers?
Well, my honourable friend is a brilliant advocate for Harrogate generally, but on this issue he is a passionate advocate for access to work and disability confident, and of course we work to promote those schemes through our social media, working with stakeholders, and of course with local employer partnership teams and employer associations, and through the Disability Confidence Scheme generally. What I would say is that I would certainly welcome the opportunity to look at ways in which we can spread the word further, including on a localised basis. I'm about to do this as a constituency MP in Corby, and perhaps we could do the same in Harrogate.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. On Friday night, I was given the terrible news that a popular business in my constituency, Morton Rolls, had ceased trading, putting at risk 250 jobs. I wonder if the Secretary of State would take the time to meet with me to discuss what can be done to support the business and indeed the 250 staff who are now threatened with redundancy.
The Honourable Lady raises a very important matter. She is quite right to raise it on the floor of the House. We do have a number of measures that we would typically stand up in the circumstances that she describes, including a surge of local support to get jobs going and vacancies matched up with those who are sadly going to lose their jobs. I will certainly ask the Employment Minister to meet with her and to discuss this as a matter of urgency.
Louise Smith.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. I echo my honourable friend for Harrogate's concern for access to work. Can I also ask about progress that is being made on the Disability Action Plan and how he will ensure effective work across government?
Well, the Disability Action Plan is a really valuable opportunity to drive forward meaningful progress on a number of areas to help improve the lives of disabled people. We are currently in the process of assembling the Ministerial Disability Champions. I want to see ideas from across government brought together. We will then hear from disabled people, get out there and consult on the plan, and then make sure that we deliver on it over the course of the next 18 months to 2 years. This is about quick wins and getting them off the stocks and delivering for disabled people.
Mr Speaker, I place on record my thanks to the Pensions Minister for incredible hard work that she did in enabling the automatic of pension enrolment to get the age lower and the earnings. Does she agree with me that it's a major concern that people in Stoke-on-Trent, North Kidsgrove and Talk, 25% leave without having a workplace pension in place? And this is why this bill is so important. I'm grateful to have colleagues' support from across the House.
Speaker, my honourable friend is absolutely right, and can I congratulate him on his brilliant bill, which will help women, the lowest paid and part-time workers in Stoke-on-Trent, Kidsgrove and Talk and beyond.
Right. That completes those questions. Those who wish to leave, please do so. Before proceedings on the urgent question begin, I want to make it clear that the question is about the proposed appointment of the second Permanent Secretary to the Department for Levelling Up, Housing and Communities as Chief of Staff to to the Leader of the Opposition. It is not about the Committee of Privileges inquiry. Let's stress that now. The House has charged the committee with undertaking its inquiry, and it must be allowed to complete without interference. The committee has been very clear the report issued on Friday does not contain its final conclusions and that its work continues. It is for the committee to decide how to weigh up the evidence before it, and any attempt to use this UQ to prejudice its proceedings will be out of order and will not be tolerated. Can I also say I was quite surprised by the number of urgent requests. Well, no, not surprised on that, but I was surprised that they all have the same wording and the same length of sentence. Can I just say to the House, whichever side it comes from, I won't be moved by mass lobbying. I was more impressed by the individual ones that took the time to express why it was important, not just a one-line sentence signed by numerous members in the House. So please, don't try mass lobbying again. No, it is now come for the time to call Sir Robert Butland to ask his urgent question. Sir Robert.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will my right honourable friend, the Paymaster General, make a statement on the impartiality of the civil service in light of the proposed appointment of the second permanent secretary of the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities as Chief of Staff to the Leader of the Opposition?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can confirm that following a media report the previous day, Sue Gray, formerly Second Permanent Secretary at DLUC and at the Cabinet Office, resigned from the Civil Service on Thursday, the 2nd of March. This resignation was accepted with immediate effect. On Friday, the 3rd of March, a statement from the opposition announced that the Labour Party had offered Sue Gray the role of Chief of Staff to the Leader of the Opposition. The House will recognise that this is an exceptional situation. It is unprecedented for a serving Permanent Secretary to resign to seek to take up a senior position working for the Leader of the Opposition. As honourable members will expect, the Cabinet Office is looking into the circumstances leading up to Sue Gray's resignation in order to update the relevant civil service leadership and ministers of the facts. Subsequent to that, I will update the House appropriately. By way of background, to inform honourable members, there are 4 pertinent set of rules and guidance for civil servants in relation to this issue. First, under the Civil Service Code, every civil servant is expected to uphold the civil service's core values, which include impartiality. The Code states civil servants must act in a way that deserves and retains the confidence of ministers. Secondly, for very senior civil servants, rules apply when they wish to leave the service. Permanent secretaries are subject to the business appointments process, which for most senior leavers is administered by ACOBA, the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments. They provide advice to the Prime Minister, who is the ultimate decision-maker in cases of the most senior civil servants. Once the Prime Minister has agreed the conditions and the appointment is taken up, ACOBA publishes the letter to the applicant on their website. The business appointment rules form part of civil servants' contracts of employment. The rules state that approval must be obtained prior to a job offer being announced. The Cabinet Office has not, as yet, been informed that the relevant notification to ACOBA has been made. Thirdly, civil servants must follow guidance on the declaration and management of outside interests. They are required on an ongoing basis to declare and manage any outside interests which may give rise to an actual or perceived conflict of interest. Finally, the Directory of Civil Service Guidance states the contact between senior civil servants and leading members of opposition parties should be cleared with ministers. Having set out the relevant rules, Mr. Speaker, let me finish by saying that, regardless of the details of the specific situation, I understand why members of this House and eminent commentators outside have raised concerns. The impartiality and perceived impartiality of the civil service is constitutionally vital to the conduct of the government, and I'm certain all senior civil servants are acutely aware of the importance of it being maintained. Ministers must be able to speak to their officials from a position of absolute trust. And so it is the responsibility of everyone in this House to preserve and support the impartiality of the civil service.
Mr. Speaker, to echo my right honourable friend's comments, many of us are indeed surprised and, frankly, deeply disappointed about the particular circumstances that have emerged. This is not about the character or quality of Sue Gray. Having had the pleasure of working with her over a number of years, I can testify, along with many others, to those qualities. This is, as my right honourable friend has said, about an issue of fundamental trust that has to exist between impartial civil servants up to the highest level, and here we are dealing with a permanent secretary, Mr. Speaker, and the ministers whom they serve. That has been the position since at least the Northcote-Trevelyan report of the mid-19th century, and must be the position in future, particularly if the party opposite is serious about wishing to achieve power. And if this government isn't prepared to defend that impartiality, then the activities of the Leader of the Opposition might suggest that he is not prepared to defend that impartiality. I'm grateful to my right honourable friend for clarifying the position with the application to Aqaba. Will he confirm that this appointment, if indeed it is to be taken up, cannot be taken up until it is formally approved following advice from that committee? And secondly, is it correct that the prevailing Aqaba advice for civil servants has a potential waiting period of between 3 months and indeed up to 2 years? Thirdly, will a lobbying prohibition be imposed in this case? And finally, will a restriction on the passage of official information to the party opposite be imposed in this instance? I say again, Mr. Deputy Speaker, trust and impartiality are vital if this system of government is to work. I would hope that in this case those issues will be defended.
I thank my right honourable learned friend. I share his disappointment, and whatever the merits of the individual, I would stress that it is critical that we all, on both sides of the House, do all we can to support the impartiality of the civil service. He asked 3 points in particular. Whether there's a 3-month to a 2-year period, he is right. There's also the ability Aqaba can recommend that no such appointment will be appropriate. It can go further. But there's a standard 3-month waiting period in the contracts of employment for permanent secretaries. Aqaba generally goes up to 2 years, but it can go further. There is a lifetime requirement on all civil servants, which I know they take hugely seriously, of respecting the confidentiality of the work that they do. It is right that that is in place. And lastly, Aqaba is an advisory position. I've not been impressed by the Labour Party over this saga. I trust that the Labour Party would indeed follow recommendations from Aqaba, or unless they're going to cast even more doubt on their credibility.
Shadow Leader of the Labour Party, Angela Rayner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I'd also like to thank members opposite for asking why a senior civil servant famed for their integrity and dedication to public service decided to join the party with a real plan for Britain, rather than, Mr. Speaker, a tired-out, washed-up, sleaze-addicted Tory government. This is the exceptional circumstances that the Minister spoke about. A party so self-obsessed that they are using parliamentary time to indulge in the conspiracy theories of the former Prime Minister and his gang. What will they ask for next? A Westminster Hall debate on the moon landings, the bill of dredging the Loch Ness, or a public inquiry into whether the earth is flat? The biggest threat to the impartiality of the civil service is the party opposite and their decade of debasing and demeaning public standards in public life. And they talk about trust, Mr. Speaker. This debate says more about the delusions of the modern Conservative Party than it does about anything else. And after this question, Mr. Speaker, I'll go back to my office to help people struggling with the cost of living crisis, getting an NHS dentist or...
Order! 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 I don't think that was a wise idea to carry on when I'm stood up. Thank you. Can I just say, I expect everybody to be heard quietly, because I want to hear what's being said. It's too important not for me to hear. And when you keep chunnering on, I cannot hear. So I want the same respect to everyone who wishes to speak. Angela Wren.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I was saying, after this question, I'll go back to my office to help people struggling with the cost of living, getting an NHS dentist and paying their energy bills, all of which is a result of 13 years of this failed Conservative administration. While they play games, Mr. Speaker, we're getting on with tackling the real issues facing the country. When will they do the same?
Well, Mr. Speaker, having heard from the Right Honourable Lady, she's clearly been advised that attack is the best form of defence. I quite understand why they feel in need of some more advisers and some new advisers, given her tone today. I understand the dilemma faced by the Leader of the Opposition. Having looked inside his tent, I understand why he's reaching so far outside it. After so many rebrands, I appreciate why the Right Honourable Lady and the Leader of the Opposition require someone who can do joined up. But let me just say this. The party opposite talks about rules. They talk about transparency. They talk about standards in public life. Given all the constant talk, it's time they walked the walk. So I ask the Right Honourable Lady to go away and think. Why are they refusing to publish when they met with Sue Gray? Why are they being evasive? Why can't they tell us what they discussed, where they met, how often they met? Their refusal to do so begs the question, exactly what is Labour trying to hide? Many across the House have noticed that the Leader of the Opposition has a tendency to claim a self-righteous monopoly on morals. But there are now serious questions as to whether Labour, by acting fast and loose, undermined the rules and the impartiality of the civil service. Those opposite must ask themselves, why did the Leader of the Opposition covertly meet with a senior civil servant, and why were those meetings not declared? They believe ACOBA rules should be tightened, but why weren't the current ones followed? It is incumbent on everyone across the House to uphold and preserve the integrity and the perceived impartiality of the civil service. This is about trust, Mr. Speaker, and it is the Labour Party that risks damaging that trust with an offer of appointment. But the Labour Party can help restore that trust. They can do the right thing. They can publish the list of meetings between themselves and Sue Gray. They can publish who attended those meetings and publish when they started speaking to Sue Gray, because there is nothing in the ACOBA rules that stops them doing so today.
Chair of the Select Committee, William Ragg.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I say how heartened I am to see the Chamber so well attended for a Cabinet Office urgent question on matters of constitutional propriety. It hasn't always been like that in here. Now, can I say, Mr. Speaker, on a personal note, I would consider this appointment to be somewhat ill-judged, and I think those who are of reasonable mind on all sides of this argument would accept that. But can I ask my right honourable friend if he shares my confidence in our noble friend Lord Pickles and his committee, the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments, to discharge its functions correctly? And I wonder also, has he any more thoughts about making ACOBA rulings underpinned in statute. And just to end, though, Mr. Speaker, I think it's important to say, given the individual at the heart of this, does he share my concern that it is wrong to impugn an entire civil service of political bias, and that it is important that he asserts that from the dispatch box?
Starting with, if I may, Mr. Speaker, the most important point which my honourable friend made, absolutely to back up his point on the standards of the civil service. I believe we are lucky and fortunate to have good people working throughout the civil service. I know that a large number of them will be very concerned by these events because they know the critical importance of that bond of trust between a minister and their most senior advisers. I totally respect the work of ACOBA and all of the committee. I know that they will consider their processes, they will go through this thoroughly, and the Prime Minister will in due course receive their advice. On the wider point my honourable friend makes, clearly the government has received recommendations from his own committee, from PACAC, from Sir Nigel Boardman, and from the Committee of Standards in Public Life. A process is well advanced for coming up with a government response to that, and I expect to be sharing that with the House in due course.
We now come to SNP spokesperson Kirsten Platt.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm glad to hear the Minister talking about the hard work that the civil service do and being clear in agreeing with his colleague that the Ministers and Secretaries of State would be nowhere were it not for the constant hard work of the impartial civil servants, and it's very important that the Minister talks to his backbench colleagues and ensures that in making statements about individuals they are not tarring the entire civil service with some of the allegations that they are bringing forward. Mr. Speaker, I've asked repeatedly about anti-corruption champions, and while we are standing here talking about issues that relate to breaches of the ministerial code or potential breaches of the ministerial code, it is incredibly important the government gets its house in order and ensures that we have an anti-corruption champion in place. Will the Minister therefore both talk to his backbench colleagues to ensure that their language is moderated when they are talking about civil servants, and also ensure that the ministerial code is adhered to, that in order that we can be viewed in a better light internationally?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, thank you, and I thank the Honourable Lady for her question. The anti-corruption strategy is run by my right honourable friend, the Minister for Security. I know he works actively on that. I know that an anti-corruption champion will be appointed in due course. I have to say it is in deference to the Honourable Lady's position, I think that's a very different scenario from what we're talking about today. I think we're talking about the Civil Service Code for a start, not the Ministerial Code. And but I do agree with her that we need to always support and not undermine the impartiality and the perceived impartiality of the civil service. That applies to all of us, including the Leader of the Opposition.
Sir William Cash.
Is my right honourable friend aware as to whether or not a contract has been entered into between the parties concerned, written or unwritten? Because this important question raised by my right honourable friend raises not only questions of constitutional propriety, and not only questions of impartiality, but also matters relating to confidentiality between the persons concerned. And furthermore, I'd like to know whether there is any question of any involvement of taxpayers' money as part of these arrangements as being part of the short money which will be involved in the office of the Leader of the Opposition.
I thank my right honourable friend. As he will appreciate, I am in no position to know whether there is a contract, either oral or written, between Sue Gray and the Labour Party, nor am I in any position to judge how her putative post, if it was to go through, would be funded. They are both questions that can only be answered on the other side of the House. It would be in the interest of transparency and clarity were those to be cleared up, along with the timeline of events as to when these meetings started, who took part and where they took place.
Ben Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On impartiality, Mr. Speaker, Sue Gray has resigned, and I can assure the right honourable gentleman that she was just as resolute in seeking to protect standards in public life and the ministerial code when I was a minister as she has tried to be under this Conservative government. And aren't her professionalism and integrity just what Britain needs after the debasement, absolute debasement of our standards in public life in the last 13 years?
Minister. I'm deliberately not getting drawn into matters on individuals, Mr. Speaker, nor should I be. What I am happy to be drawn on, though, is whether there is a right way of making these kind of appointments. This is an unprecedented appointment, offer of appointment. It is totally unprecedented. At a permanent secretary level, this has not, as far as I'm aware, ever been undertaken before. And it's incredibly important in those circumstances that the rules are followed appropriately. We are checking to make certain what exactly was the run-up to her resignation. Jacob Rees-Mogg.
Mr. Speaker, now many people may say that Miss Gray is a splendid woman, and I understand she even fed the cats in the Cabinet Office. But does this not smash to pieces the idea of an independent civil service when we know that one of the most senior civil servants in the country was conniving in secret meetings with the party of opposition? And does this not undervalue years of advice and reports that she has given? Her views on devolution, which were known constantly to be soft. Her report into the Right Honourable Member, the member for Uxbridge, which we now know was done by a friend of the Socialists. Does this not undermine all her previous work and the idea of an independent civil service?
Can I just remind them... Just sit... Can I just say to them, I did say I don't want anybody creeping into the report. I know you're careful, but it's just the marker. I don't want it to creeping feast. Right. Let us move on to the Minister to reply.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will... 2 points to make to my right honourable friend. The first is we need to make certain this does not damage the impartiality or the perceptions of impartiality of the civil service as a whole. My right honourable friend would, I'm sure, agree that that is incredibly important, and we need to ensure that that's retained. And I'm deeply worried that the approach made by the Labour Party may serve to threaten and to put at risk those risks. I put that at risk. I would also say that I think I will leave it at that. We mustn't tarnish the whole civil service by one appointment, but it is the opposition playing fast and loose with a set of rules designed to protect the impartiality of that civil service that we all know is so important constitutionally for our country.
Noddy Cowans.
Conservatives demanding that Labour observe the recommendations of Aqaba, when previous Conservative Chancellors and Foreign Secretaries bypassed the process before taking up appointments, and we have Labour stretching the process to breaking point while operating in the shadows. Is it time that we give Aqaba some teeth?
I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. My right honourable friend, the Prime Minister, is considering proposals made by PACAC, by the Committee of Standards in Public Life, and by Sir Nigel Boardman about how we could improve the business appointments process. I think there is a lot of sympathy that we should be looking at those rules, and we will be reporting to the House on how they could be amended or improved. I do think it's an irony, though, that the opposition has consistently called for those rules to be tightened, but they don't seem to be quite aware of what the rules, or may not be fully aware of what the rules are today.
Simon Hoare.
Mr. Speaker, the response of the civil service to this issue, I think, amplifies and underscores to all of our comfort the importance which they attach to their impartiality to serve ministers of the Crown, irrespective of which colour they stand for election under. Yeah. But could I echo what I think is a growing theme, led ably by my honourable friend, the member for Hazel Grove? For the committee to put the recommendation to the Prime Minister puts the Prime Minister always, but particularly in this case, in a very invidious position. If he says no, he looks churlish. If he says yes, he makes the civil service, already anxious by the attack on their impartiality, still more anxious. Can I urge my right honourable friend to speed up the process of response to the suggestions which have been made to formalise the recommendations of the committee?
Yeah.
Minister.
Well, I thank my honourable friend for the question. As I've already said what I've said regarding the government considering how the business appointments procedures could be improved. I do have a lot of faith in the Ocoba process in Lord Pickles and his committee, and I know we look forward to him looking through this process. Sue Gray will put through her application, or if that's a confidential process, I presume that is happening, and they will need to take a decision on the basis of it and then provide advice.
Andrew Gwynn.
Thank you. The faux outrage and wild conspiracies from the party opposite are kidding nobody. Can I remind the Minister of the words of a predecessor of his as Cabinet Office Minister, the noble Lord Maud, who said that he'd worked with Sue Gray for 5 years and, I quote, Mr. Speaker, never had the slightest reason to question either her integrity or her political impartiality, and went on to add that the Leader of the Opposition is, and I quote, fortunate to have secured her services. He's right, isn't he?
Minister.
So you're secured.
Well, I'm delighted. The honourable gentleman obviously knows faux outrage when he sees it. He's got a long experience of it in the mirror. I'm grateful for reminding me of the words of my predecessor as MCO and as Member of Parliament for Horsham. I mean, I too have had I too have worked with Sue Gray. I've admired her advice, and I have had no reason to question her integrity. That doesn't mean, however, that this has been the way we should conduct these kind of circumstances. I think I'm very disappointed, or I am very disappointed, in the actions of the Labour Party. I'm very disappointed in how this has come through, and I think there are real concerns about the impact that may have on the perceptions of impartiality more broadly.
Sir John Whittingdale.
My right friend aware that I, like many members here, was advised by Sue Gray on my appointment as a minister on the steps that I needed to take in order to avoid any perception of potential conflict of interest. And does he therefore understand why her appointment has caused such anger right across the civil service, as it undermines that very principle of the perception of conflict?
Minister.
I do. My right honourable friend is right to draw upon the fact that many senior civil servants are troubled by this. They know the vital importance of the bond of trust between ministers and civil servants, and anything that might serve to undermine it is not healthy, and it's not good for the way we do business.
Mr.
Speaker, you, like I, have been experienced members of this House. And I understand also that very early on in your remarks you rumbled what was going on in terms of the number of requests for this to be debated this morning. Isn't it the fact that this is a shabby little manoeuvre from the shabbiest government that I've seen in 40 years? Mr. Speaker, can I just ask that rather than this being spontaneous, I was walking over here with a respected backbencher from the government side who said, I'm not going over. They've been trying to get everyone here this morning. The whips are on a 5-line whip. And the suggestion, Mr. Speaker, they don't like it. The suggestion that the civil service is up in arms is nonsense. This comes from the Prime Minister and it comes from this shabby government.
Order! Just a minute. I'm not sure there was a question. In which case, we'll move on. Susan Webb.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The whole situation surrounding this appointment is quite extraordinary, and many will say it is outrageous. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that appointing such a senior and high-profile civil servant into this post under such circumstances is questionable? And does the right honourable friend agree with me that what is of deep concern is the timing of this appointment, when she was approached, and where meetings were held, the details must be published?
Minister.
I believe transparency would help. In answer to my honourable friend that it's important that processes are followed, because this is an unprecedented appointment. And in those circumstances, it is not too much to ask for the meetings to be published, who met whom, when, where, what was discussed. The points raised by my right honourable friend, the member for the honourable friend, it is absolutely right that they do go through this and that the Labour Party publishes exactly what took place.
Samuel Wilson. Mr. Speaker, the impartiality of senior civil servants has been called into question a long time ago during the Brexit debate and the events subsequent to that. But these negotiations obviously didn't take place the morning after Sue Gray resigned. They've been going on for some time, and I suppose the question for this House is, what sensitive political issues was she involved in during those negotiations? And will the Minister agree with me that no amount of bluster from the front bench will ever hide the double standards of lecturing about accountability and transparency, while at the same time not being prepared to answer a straightforward question as to when they started talking to Sue Gray?
I think the honourable gentleman puts it rather well. It would be very simple, just to help put minds at rest, by publishing the data, just setting out when the meetings took place, who met whom, when and where. And that will help reassure the House. It won't reassure the House completely, but at least there will be proper transparency and some more clarity.
Richard Drax.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This is about impartiality and trust, and it saddens me to see the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party in such a senior position defending this in the way that she did. If the rules have not been followed and a lengthy period of time has not succumbed, i.e. 2 years, Sue Gray has had access to highly confidential and very personal information. She is in a very powerful position to use this not just with anyone, but with the opposition party and with the general election looming.
The honourable gentleman is correct. My honourable friend is correct that there is clearly Sue Gray has access to a lot of information. That does not mean that she would put the information to ill use. But the ACOBA guidelines talk about sensitive information and how you can avoid the perception that you've been put into a difficult position in those circumstances. So ACOBA has obviously got a job to do.
Mike Henchman.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Which bond of trust or aspect of impartiality was broken when Sue Gray was a senior civil servant? The same Sue Gray that was praised by the government, almost the best thing since sliced bread. What's the problem? What's the issue now?
We are conducting analysis to find out the facts, to ensure that the facts that led up to the resignation of Sue Gray can be set out. It would help dispel concerns and worries and problems if the Labour Party could simply set out the facts themselves. And there is no reason why they couldn't do that today.
Dr. Matthew Waffle.
Mr. Speaker, the Permanent Secretary at the Department for Education recently highlighted the detail of the Civil Service Code to all her staff. She said that if anybody received contact from the Leader of the Opposition or a member of the Shadow Cabinet, you should tell your Permanent Secretary right away. Is the Minister aware when Sue Gray informed her Permanent Secretary of the initial discussion she held with the Labour Party before announcing her resignation?
Okay. Minister.
As I say, there is work in progress to ensure that all the facts are absolutely identified, but I'm not aware that there were any such discussions prior to the Thursday of last week.
Wayne David.
Mr. Speaker, not that long ago, the Advisory Committee on Business Appointments found that the former member for Aberconwy, a former Defence Minister, committed a clear breach of the ministerial code by not asking for ACOBA advice when taking up a position. Now, can the Minister indicate and remind us what actions were taken against the former member for Aberconwy for a breach that was described at the time as totally unacceptable? What did they do?
Minister.
The honourable gentleman refers to a former member of this House, a former minister, and a former member of the Conservative Party. I think he had the whip withdrawn at that stage. I don't know what actions ACOBA took. ACOBA is, I don't think what actions are available to them, because ACOBA is an advisory body. However, I think it beholds all of us who wish to respect the values of impartiality within the civil service and respect the rules to ensure that we follow them to the letter.
Steve Bright.
So I think it's an important, urgent question. This desired appointment, just there's something about it doesn't feel right to me. And to echo the chair of the Select Committee, who's no longer in his place, I don't think it passes the reasonable test. But we are where we are for now, although I expect there's a lot more to come on this. The Minister confirmed that the Cabinet Office are looking at the circumstances of the job offer. Can he just say when we might expect that to be complete? And will he be asking Sue Gray herself, who of course has every interest in transparency, the who met who, when and where question?
Minister.
We will be trying to wrap this up as soon as we can. Direct answer to my honourable friend. I don't know how long it will take, hopefully shortly, but it would ease that process if the Labour Party would just come clean with us exactly what meetings took place. There's no reason why this should not be made public, why we should not be fully transparent, at least no reason of which I am aware.
Weston.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I don't know Sue Gray. I only know her by virtue of her reputation. But I do weigh on the words of Lord Maud that we heard just a moment ago, that she is a person of utmost decency.
Exactly.
I'm aware of various civil servants who've joined this place as members of Parliament from all sides, and therefore I'm surprised really at the concern from the government benches, because this is a person of the utmost integrity, and given the high esteem in which she is held, why does he think the Right Honourable Member for Uxbridge never considered appointing her?
Minister.
As I said earlier, I'm not trying to engage in a discussion about a particular individual. I've noted what my predecessor, Lord Maud, said, and as I say, I've had personal direct experience of working with Sue Gray, and whilst doing so, I had no reason in any way to question her integrity. But this UQ is about that process. We need to understand this is an unprecedented appointment of a permanent secretary to this position. It is incredibly important when you have very senior civil servants, if they choose to leave the service, that everything is followed appropriately. That is what the analysis is undertaking. That is what we want. Those are the facts that we need to establish. It would help if the Labour Party would help us in that process.
James Wilde.
Mr. Speaker, does the Minister agree with me that if the shoe was on the other foot, the Labour Party would be asking exactly the same questions? And all that we've seen today is rank hypocrisy from the opposition benches. And will the Minister also agree with me that the line put out by the Labour Party that somehow his most senior advisor and chief of staff wouldn't have a role in the general election campaign is utterly ridiculous?
I think my honourable friend makes a good point. I've done a number of urgent questions in this House. I've rarely seen the opposition benches as empty as they are today.
Amy Callaghan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Why are this government happy to attack civil servants with this urgent question, yet are unwilling to pay them properly?
Minister.
To be clear, Mr. Speaker, there is no desire whatsoever or intention to attack civil servants on this side of the House. None whatsoever. What this side of the House wants to do is to ensure that we protect the impartiality of the civil service, that we protect it from any shift in the perceptions of the impartiality of the civil service, and that we hold the opposition to account to actually be a bit more transparent about their dealings.
Jonathan Gullis.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition was best friends with the member for Islington North, and as soon as he lost the election, dumped him. He was pro a second referendum, lost the election, dumped it. Had 10 pledges to become Leader of the Opposition, dumped it. A rebrand after rebrand. This is a Labour Party with a grubby deal clearly going on behind the scenes here, Mr. Speaker. The Leader of the Opposition talks about integrity openness and honesty. So why can't he evaluate all those three things and tell us who, where, when and why?
I very much agree that, with my honourable friend, that those are questions that need to be answered. And they need to be answered by that side of the House.
Alice Cunningham.
Mr. Speaker, I don't know how familiar the Minister is with Matthew chapter 7 verses 3 to 5. How can you say to your brother, let me take the speck out of your eye, when all the while there's a plank in your own eye? Contrary to what the Minister said, this move is not without precedent. Sir James Sassoon, a senior civil servant on the same grade as Sue Gray, resigned in the same month that Lehman Brothers collapsed, only to join George Osborne as his economic advisor 3 weeks later, and in time became a Tory government minister. Will the Minister confirm that appointment and correct the record?
Minister.
I can't recall that particular appointment, I regret to tell the honourable gentleman. There are other appointments which I can think of, but none where the individual concerned had such a prominent role in government at the centre of affairs, at the centre of affairs inside the Cabinet Office, and in this case inside DLUC. I understand why people inside this House and outside want to ensure that processes have been correctly followed.
Anthony Bagnall.
Mr. Speaker, the damage has already been done. The Minister keeps on saying what impact this will have on the civil service, but it already has had an impact. And away from this, it might also be noted that Sue Gray was chairing the infected blood inquiry, in which many of us in this House have written to various ministers to see if we can get answers. What now is the state on that very needed and necessary inquiry?
Minister.
My honourable friend raises an excellent question. Sue Gray was actually the sponsor to the inquiry inside the Cabinet Office. I'm looking forward to meeting members of the infected and affected community tomorrow. Sue Gray had an incredibly important role in corralling that across government. We will need to fill that post. I've not been able to do so to date. It is a matter of huge priority to me. It requires an awful lot of work, and there are very, very serious stakes.
James Shannon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can I thank the Minister for his answers? Does the Minister accept that impartiality is not just a desirable quality, but is also an essential quality for any investigation? Does the Minister believe that the tests for impartiality were met in this case before any news of later jobs had emerged?
Minister.
I thank my honourable gentleman for his question. I don't want to prejudge the analysis of the facts. Clearly, ACOBA have got to do their work as well and come to a conclusion. And I'm sorry to repeat myself to the honourable gentleman, but more clarity as to what happened when really would help speed up that process.
Amber Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I confess to feeling a little sorry for the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party, because she has been sent out here today to defend the indefensible. We have rules for a reason, and as has been rightly observed across this House, Sue Gray had knowledge not only of some of the most sensitive policy-making knowledge, but also of the legitimate personal interest of ministers. And it is for those very good reasons that we should abhor this decision today. Can I agree with my right honourable friend about the importance of establishing the dates on which these meetings, which undoubtedly would have taken weeks if not months to take place, but also can I ask whether he will consider amending the senior civil service contracts as well as the civil service code to prevent future such occurrences, because this is something which strikes at the core of the integrity of the civil service.
Minister. I thank my honourable friend. There is work being undergone at the moment, looking at our conclusions that we draw from the work done by Sir Nigel Boardman, by PACAC and by the Committee on Standards in Public Life. I wouldn't wish to preempt any of those discussions. I don't know, in all candour, the honourable friend, whether that is something which has been considered, but there'll be a further opportunity in this House when we come forward with our proposed reforms in due course for such matters to be raised.
Michael Fabricant.
I mean, is it not ironic that Sue Gray was the head
of the Cabinet Office's Proprietary and Ethics team, and it is her who has put the civil service under a dark shadow, a shadow which need not have existed. And is it also not the case that this, therefore, was bad judgment by her, but also bad judgment by the Leader of the Opposition, who, when asked 10 times this morning to give more information as to when discussions began, 10 times he evaded?
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend. I think it may well have been a miscalculation by the Leader of the Opposition. He can do his best to rescue that by being fully open about the facts.
Nigel Adams.
Mr. Speaker, can I start by saying I've had worked with many fantastic civil servants in my time as a minister, and those relationships are built on trust. And I've also had a very good working relationship with Sue Gray in the Cabinet Office. But does the Minister agree with me that this appointment by the Leader of the Opposition is not only politically naive? I mean, it's hard enough for ministers not knowing which of their WhatsApp messages are going to be leaked to journalists by members of your own side. But surely this appointment now places all civil servants working with ministers in a very difficult position in terms of trust and impartiality.
Minister.
I thank my right honourable friend. And when he says he has a good working relationship with Sue Gray, I know he speaks for many ministers, me included, and I see other right honourable gentlemen nodding their heads in agreement with that phrase. But that makes it all the more shocking that fast and loose approaches can be taken, it appears to me, to the rules, and that can therefore bring into doubt the really important relationships of trust that exist between ministers and civil servants. It's so important, as the right honourable gentleman knows, it's so important for the way we do business, and I think people should think very, very carefully before they risk doing anything that might call that into question or jeopardise that incredibly important relationship.
Peter Bull.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I care very deeply about this place, and we've been plunged into a constitutional crisis. Members of this House, whether they're ministers or not, need to be able to talk to senior civil servants without fear that that information is going to be used for party political purposes. It's done immense damage, Mr. Speaker, to the civil service, and I don't know if it'll be able to recover. But it's not about Sue Gray. It's about the Leader of the Opposition. We would not be here today if he hadn't asked her to become his Chief of Staff. Would the excellent Minister agree with me that the person to be criticised here today is the Leader of the Opposition?
Minister.
I concur. I fear that the Leader of the Opposition, in making this appointment, perhaps didn't realise, perhaps blundered in his approach, didn't really think through the consequences of having someone right at the heart of government being invited to take up a position in the heart of the Labour Party, shifting from an incredibly important, as my honourable friend mentioned, very important work ongoing, to then working in a more party political guise. That obviously has implications.
Lee Anderson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Now then, this latest grubby scandal from the Labour Party has cast a dark stain on democracy. So, does my right honourable friend agree with me that the Leader of the Opposition should come out of hiding, come clean and publish the details of the meetings?
Minister.
I do think that would help. There are ways that it's not it is far from beyond, and I've been pondering the question asked by my right honourable friend earlier. I've been pondering the efficacy of people moving from the civil service into parliamentary roles. So clearly that can't be deemed an impossibility. There are roles, many of us have actually benefited from time in the civil service before then taking on political roles. But there are ways of doing this, and that is what's so important. And I think it would be really helpful if the Labour Party could just transparently set out exactly what took place.
Marcus Fish.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The House and the country should know that on the 7th of September 2019, I witnessed Sue Gray who was then Permanent Secretary for the Department of Finance in Northern Ireland, discussed with the Special Advisor to the UK Cabinet Office how to exclude solutions other than high alignment with EU law and regulation from consideration by the government in respect of Northern Ireland, as under the withdrawal agreement. A month later, the government proposed the Northern Ireland Protocol, which subjected Northern Ireland to EU law and regulation. Since then, Sue Gray has been the civil servant specifically responsible for advising on the union considerations in government. It was reported this week that Sue Gray was present in the briefing of Cabinet Ministers on the PM's Windsor framework, which, among other things, appears to confirm and embed the application of EU law and regulation in Northern Ireland.
No, you sit down. Do you want to go out? No, right. The question is, as I pulled up the member on the other side, once you go on, there must be a question, and I've stopped it. I hope there's a question now. Marcus Rich.
Absolutely right.
Don't judge me.
No,
right.
I'm
sorry, sit down. You just lost it completely now. Come on then.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The only saving grace for colleagues in any honest, fair and unbiased investigation is the senior civil service. Now, in light of the appointment of a senior civil servant by Labour's leader, who's been involved in many investigations of colleagues, would my right honourable friend agree with me that if the process looks like a rotting, stinking fish, if it smells like a rotting, stinking fish, and it tastes like a rotting, stinking fish, chances are it's a rotting, stinking fish.
My right honourable friend has expressed his view in his own style. He will know me in my style to say I'm going to await the conclusions that come out of the factual inquiry that we're going through now. But he has made his point, as ever.
Mr. Speaker, when I was a Minister at the Department for Levelling Up, I will have had several conversations with Sue Gray on the basis of confidentiality and impartiality. I'm slightly unnerved to feel that she may have simultaneously been having discussions with the Leader of the Opposition. So I asked the Minister, is he able to tell us when the Secretary of State, the Right Honourable Member for Surrey Heath, became aware of the negotiations between Sue Gray and the Leader of the Opposition?
Minister. The honourable gentleman refers to conversations he was having with Sue Gray, and the honourable gentleman says that he's not aware whether Sue Gray was having conversations with others at the same time. Look, I'm not aware of any body in government being informed before last Thursday of those discussions, but it could be easily cleared up if the Labour Party was just to publish the timeline this afternoon.
Craig McKinley.
I believe in the integrity and the diligence and the value of our most unique civil service. All civil servants, as everybody else, has got a right to a political view, and they can exercise that privately at the ballot box. I do want to put on record, Mr. Speaker, that I rigorously have defended Sue Gray as she did her work on Partygate last year. But in this case, what is important is the job they've left, the time in between, and then the job they then subsequently take up. I don't need to make the House aware that the events of last year aren't just dust that's settled, they're hanging thick in the air still. I'm asking on behalf of the...
No, you don't finish. You're finished now. When I stand up means you sit down. And I hate to say we've both been here a long time. We should know the rules of the House. Now, can we just have the question without going to the areas I ask people not to venture into?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Speaker. My apologies. I'm asking a question of the Minister from the men and women on the normal Clapham omnibus. Does this smell right?
OK, that's Minister.
I thank the honourable gentleman. Very succinct, and I would recommend to the my honourable friend, we do need to get the facts out. We do need to know exactly what took place. We are doing that work. It would help if the Labour Party assisted us in that process.
Scott Benson.
Mr. Speaker, the Civil Service Code states that officials must retain the confidence of ministers as to their political impartiality. Now that Sue Gray, with knowledge of the most sensitive details of government ministers, has agreed to work in a political capacity for the Leader of the Labour Party, how can the government ensure that other ministers are protected from political stitch-ups?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful to my honourable friend. I will. There are rules in place. As I've already said, there is a means by which civil servants who choose to leave the world of the civil service and even take on political roles can do it. It's just really important that we know, and ministers know, that the rules are going to be followed in those circumstances. And we need to know that they have in this. That is why we're looking as to what took place, and the Labour Party could help us.
Marco Longhi.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Labour Party has offered Sue Gray the role of Chief of Staff to the Leader of the Opposition. This statement was issued by the Labour Party on Thursday, the 2nd of March 2023. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that any reasonable person would call into question the impartiality of this person as of the 1st of March and any day before?
Minister.
It's a fair question raised by my honourable friend, but it is one which we need to explore, given the questions that we are now asking about the timeline towards the resignation of Sue Gray. And as I've said repeatedly in this place, why the Labour Party can't just tell us when the first meeting took place, how long those meetings took place for. It might have been a very short period of time, it might have been a much longer period of time, but I think we'd all be reassured to know. They could tell us this afternoon.
Brendan Clark-Smith.
Madam Deputy Speaker, regarding the timing of the approach, the Leader of the Opposition failed around 10 times this morning on LBC to answer the actual question. And listeners will be questioning whether Mr Rules missed the rules. And I also note in today's Daily Telegraph there is a piece from the constitutional expert Sir Vernon Bogdanor, and I quote, "The issue is important since if the approach was made before publication, the hope of future employment might, even if only subconsciously, have influenced its content. So it would not be possible to longer regard Sue Gray as an impartial investigator." Does the Minister agree with me that perceptions matter?
Yay. Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I thank the honourable gentleman for his question. Look, I also read the article by Sir Vernon Bogdanor. He raised interesting questions. It is why we're taking this so seriously, and it is why we are exploring and want to get to the facts.
Leah Nietzsche.
Thank you. Not only impartiality is important, but also honesty. And seeing as though the Leader of the Opposition seemed a little foggy somewhat to know about dates today, it seems that perhaps the dates are being scribbled on the back of a fag packet as we speak. Can, if any dates are actually declared to the Minister, could we actually trust that they were accurate?
Slippery the truth.
Minister.
Well, I understand that the Leader of the Opposition may be short of a Chief of Staff at the moment, but I'm sure he's got someone who keeps an eye on his diary. I'm sure there is someone who could inform this House what the dates were when the meetings took place, where they took place, and what was discussed with whom. It's not too much to ask, and it would help clear up, and it would save the Leader of the Opposition from embarrassment about being asked these things repeated occasions and not being able to be clear.
Neil Hudson.
Where is he?
Robbie Moore.
Speaker, maintaining complete political impartiality is absolutely key to maintaining credibility within the civil service. So does my right honourable friend agree with me that surely, if there was even one meeting, one conversation which took place between Sue Gray and the Labour Party and the Leader of the Opposition in advance of her resignation about the job offer of such a staunch, hugely political-natured job, then surely Sue Gray's political impartiality in her role in the civil service has to be brought into question.
Minister.
I thank my honourable friend, Madam Deputy Speaker. I set out in my response to this UQ the rules, and they are in there in Hansard. People can read through them. There are protections in the rules to try and ensure that impartiality, perceived impartiality, is not jeopardised. We will explore exactly what happened in these circumstances.
Tom Randall.
Speaker, in the debate on standards in public life in June last year, the honourable member for Brighton Kemp Town asked the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party to complain that Sue Gray had been asked to attend before the Public Administration and Constitutional Affairs Committee, but had been refused several times, to which the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party replied that she absolutely agreed with the complaint, and that it shows that the Prime Minister had no regard for transparency. In that regard, does my honourable friend agree that the Deputy Leader of the Labour Party should live up to the own standards which he was extolling then and be transparent with all the facts?
Minister.
The Right Honourable Lady says we should follow the process, and I agree with the Right Honourable Lady. It's always important to follow the correct processes, and I'm sure when the Labour Party reveal all the data, as I'm sure they shall, we will then be able to see whether the processes were followed.
Aaron Bell.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. In his response to the Sue Gray report on the 25th of May last year, the Leader of the Opposition said, "I have been clear what leadership looks like. I have not broken any rules." If he didn't consult a COBA before announcing this this appointment, has he still not broken any rules?
I think I will conduct the analysis first, and then I'll be better informed as to exactly what took place. But this could, as I say, be cleared up by the Labour Party quite swiftly.
Mark Jenkinson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. A woman of integrity and a self-proclaimed Mr. Rules. Oh, yeah. Does my right honourable friend agree with me that in refusing to publish the timeline of the meetings, they've trashed both of those reputations?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think that's the case, sadly. I think it is, but it could easily be changed by simple publication.
Alexander Stafford.
Very much indeed, Madam Deputy Speaker. I've already been contacted by the hard-working civil servants who work in my Job Centre Plus in Maltby and Dillington, who are horrified to hear on LBC radio this morning the Leader of the Opposition refused to say 10 times when he was contacted first by Sue Gray in connection with a political job. Does the Minister agree with me that if any contact took place between the Leader of the Opposition or the Leader of the Opposition or any members of the Labour Party, it calls into question not only how current work and previous work is done, but in fact the impartiality, unfortunately, of the whole civil service, and we need to have the dates now of the meetings?
Minister.
Well, I respect the work done in my honourable friend's constituency by those hard-working civil servants, and right the way across the civil service there is an absolute desire that they retain their reputation for impartiality, which they all live in their daily work, and that is how they work, and they're determined to work for ministers with a relationship of trust. That's incredibly important. There's not much we're asking of the Labour Party, just to produce that schedule of dates, the timeline, so that we can start to put this, hopefully, behind us with greater transparency.
Paul Bristow.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Does the Minister share my concern that this appointment severely weakens trust in our senior civil service, and the light that is inevitably now being shone on Sue Gray and her decisions by the media, such as the appointment of an advisor who would advised all his Twitter followers to join the Labour Party? To the public, this looks farcical, and as a result, only a full disclosure of meetings and conversations will suffice in this grubby affair.
Minister.
The tragedy is that the hard work of a public servant over a long period of time is called into question, given the nature of the process that appears to have taken place. That is incredibly unfortunate, but the Labour Party could help fix that. They could just be a bit transparent, they could just be very open, and they could just say, this is what actually took place, these are the dates, this is who met, and this is where they were.
Dr. Kieran Mellon.
Madam Deputy Speaker, to be clear, from my point of view, this is nothing to do with Sue Gray. The lady could be our first living saint for all I care. It's the roles that she had in government. I can't think of a more sensitive position than Head of Propriety and Ethics, where you need trust from the ministers. It's not about this party. 7 Labour MPs have been sentenced to jail over the past 10 years. If they'd been in government, I think she'd have been quite busy with them too. It's about both sides and all parts of the House being able to trust ministers. And I have to agree with colleagues, the trust is already broken. You can't now have a discussion with someone in that position, sure that they're not going to cross over to the other side. Is it now time we look at introducing regulations to ensure this kind of thing can't happen with such sensitive roles?
Minister.
Madam Deputy Speaker, I think my honourable friend, if it's closing the session, I think I'll close on a note of saying it's not about necessarily Sue Gray and her actions. As I say, she is a public servant who has, for many decades, worked hard at the heart of government. I think it shows a miscalculation, a misstep by the Leader of the Opposition. I think in doing so, I can only assume it was inadvertent. I have to hope it was inadvertent, but I think it has caused more problems. It has called into question, in some people's minds, the impartiality, the perceived impartiality of the civil service. If that was a misstep, it was a mistake. He should accept that, in my view, and he should therefore be setting out through transparency what happened when, so that we can then get absolute clarity on what took place.
I thank the point of order, Wayne David, if it is relevant to what has just taken place.
It is relevant, and it's a point of clarification I ask for, because in response to my question, the Minister strongly implied that the very reason why the former Conservative member for Aberconwy had lost the Conservative whip was because he has not consulted with ACUA. That is not the case. He lost the Conservative whip because he voted against the government on a Brexit vote.
I assume the honourable gentleman is asking me to rule on something.
I think the Minister will
I'd ask
saying that whether the Minister would like to clarify the point of order that you've just raised. Yes, Minister, thank you.
Absolutely happy to make a point of clarification, Madam Deputy Speaker. If that was the impression I gave the honourable gentleman to his question, that was not my intention whatsoever. There was no disciplinary action taken by the Conservative Party in respect of that. It was indeed a Brexit vote, as the honourable gentleman will recall. And I thank him for the opportunity to put that on the record.
Well, I thank both right honourable gentlemen for clarifying that particular point, and we will now move on to statement from the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman.
Madam Deputy Speaker, with permission, I would like to make a statement about the inquiry into the horrendous attack on Manchester Arena on the 22nd of May 2017. Madam Deputy Speaker, I work closely with MI5, and whilst its activity is necessarily discreet, the whole country should be profoundly grateful for the patriotism and courage of its staff. They work indefatigably every day to keep the British people safe. Since the start of 2017, MI5 and the police have disrupted 37 late-stage attack plots. But, Madam Deputy Speaker, an Islamist suicide bomber murdered 22 people and injured over 1,000, as well as inflicting incalculable psychological damage and misery. I know that the whole House will join me in expressing our profound sorrow and extending our heartfelt condolences to everyone affected by this barbaric act. They were supposed to have a brilliant time and come home safely. What should have been a simple pleasure turned into a hellish nightmare. It's vital that we understand what happened and what lessons we need to learn, because we must do everything possible to prevent a repeat of this outrage. Volume 3 of the inquiry was published last Thursday. I want to thank Sir John Saunders and his team, who have spent more than 3 years on it. Sir John finds that there was a failure by the security service to act swiftly enough, and problems with the sharing of information between the security service and counter-terrorism policing. Following the publication of the report, the Director General of MI5 and the head of counter-terrorism policing offered their profound apologies for not preventing the attack. Sir John does not blame any of the educational establishments that the bomber attended for failing to identify that he was a risk, but he does find that more needs to be done to ensure that education providers share relevant information about students. Sir John concludes that the bomber should have been subject to a prevent referral at some point in 2015 or 2016, adding that, however, it is very hard to say what would have happened if he had been approached under prevent or the Channel programme. The police investigation into the attack, Operation Manteline, is praised. Although Sir John cannot conclude whether the attack would have been prevented, he finds that there was a significant missed opportunity to take further investigative action that he judges might have led to information which could have prevented it. While this is welcome, and the Home Office will work at pace with both organisations to act on the Chairman's recommendations, we must not lose sight of the fact that responsibility for the attack lies with the bomber and his brother. So these conclusions require careful consideration, Madam Deputy Speaker. Since 2017, the Government has made a number of changes to how we deal with and seek to prevent terrorist attacks. We have given law enforcement and intelligence agencies improved powers. We have strengthened the controls around access to explosives precursors. We've strengthened the management of terrorist and terrorist risk offenders in prison and on licence. We've ended the automatic early release of terrorist offenders in England, Wales and Scotland. And we've ensured that the sentences served by terrorists reflect the severity of their offending. And we've strengthened the tools for monitoring dangerous people in the community. We've invested heavily in counter-terrorism, unveiling a new counter-terrorism operations centre in 2021 that brings together partners from counter-terrorism policing, the intelligence agencies, the criminal justice system, and other government agencies. This will allow minute-by-minute collaboration between teams in the police and the MI5. Last year's integration of Special Branch into the National CT Policing Network will improve our response to the full range of national security threats, boost skills, and ensure better communication between agencies and a more consistent and effective national response. Work is currently underway to develop a new faith security training scheme to raise security awareness amongst faith communities and help them to mitigate threats. We continue to engage with faith organisations and security experts to develop this scheme. In April, my right honourable friend, the member for Witham, announced the continuation of the Jewish Community Protective Security Grant for 2022. In May, new funding was allocated to provide protective security at mosques and Muslim faith schools. In response to any terrorist attack affecting British nationals in the UK or overseas, the Home Office's Victims of Terrorism unit works to ensure the right support is available to them. The unit is conducting an internal review to strengthen their work. I am overseeing a comprehensive review of the contest strategy to combat terrorism. This follows on from the independent review of Prevent, led by William Shawcross, which assessed the programme's effectiveness in stopping people from becoming terrorists or supporting terrorism. And as the independent review made clear, Prevent requires major reform, and I've accepted all of the review's recommendations. It has underestimated the threat of Islamist extremism, which remains by far the biggest that we face. Too often, it has minimised the role of ideology in terrorism. Prevent will focus on security, not on political correctness, and its first objective will be to tackle the ideological causes of terrorism. The Government has also developed a comprehensive system of support for the owners and operators of public places across the UK. This includes access to research-driven expertise through products delivered by the National Counter-Terrorism Security Office and the Centre for Protection of National Infrastructure. But we must go further, Madam Deputy Speaker. Martin's Law, formerly known as the Protect Duty, will introduce proportionate new security requirements for certain public premises throughout the UK. They will be better prepared, ready to respond, and their staff will know what to do in the event of a terrorist attack. Martin's Law will clarify who is responsible for security activity at the premises in scope, increasing accountability. We are also considering how a full inspection function will oversee compliance to provide appropriate advice and, where necessary, to sanction. Martin Hett was one of those killed in Manchester. I'm enormously grateful to his mother, Figan Murray, and the Martin Laws campaign team, as well as to Survivors Against Terror and all security partners, businesses, charities, local authorities and victims group that have informed our work. I've always been humbled when I've met them and heard about their experiences. The doctrines that underpin how the emergency services respond to incidents have improved since the attack. So, Madam Deputy Speaker, I want to close by once again recognising the anguish and courage of the loved ones of those who were killed or hurt on that dreadful night. It united the country in sorrow and in disgust. We will continue to work non-stop to prevent further such tragedies being visited upon others, and I commend this statement to the House. Thank you.
Shadow Home Secretary Yvette Cooper.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. On the 22nd of May 2017, thousands of people, including children and their parents, went to watch a pop concert. Instead, they were faced with the most unimaginable horror, and 22 people lost their lives, including children, the youngest being just 8 years old. Hundreds more were injured. Those families have endured the unimaginable, and all our thoughts are with them today, and with the people of Manchester, who have stood and supported each other through the most difficult of times. I join the Home Secretary in thanking Sir John Saunders for this far-reaching inquiry and his vital work seeking answers for the victims and for their families. The responsibility for this vile attack lies with the bomber and his brother and those who may have radicalised and enabled them, and we condemn, all of us, their actions in the strongest possible terms. It is right that the brother has been brought to justice. But rightly too, this report has looked at why it happened, what might have prevented it, to seek the truth for families and their loved ones, and to identify changes needed for the future. And these are important and serious conclusions that are hard to hear. That there was, in Sir John's words, a significant missed opportunity to take action that might have prevented the attack. That there was a failure swiftly to act on information. There were failures in sharing information, that the bomber should have been referred to the PREVENT programme in 2015 or 16, although Sir John says it's unclear whether that would have led to action. But these are hard conclusions to hear, especially for those who have lost loved ones. The Home Secretary has rightly said that agencies and counter-terror police work immensely hard to keep us safe every day. And Sir John also says in his report that they have disrupted 27 major Islamist extremist terror plots in recent years, in addition to 5 right and left-wing terror plots too. And that is as a result of their immense efforts night and day. And it is because they are dedicated to keeping us safe. They also recognise the importance of facing up to things going wrong. And they've expressed their profound sorrow and apologies too. So John has rightly made recommendations, and rightly everyone is seeking to take those forward, and we should support them in doing so. But I want to press the Home Secretary just on some of the details of those measures. Firstly, on Martin's Law, all of us support the work of Figan Murray and many of the Manchester survivors to introduce this. Can she tell me the timetable? Will it have second reading before the summer recess? On the closed recommendations, which clearly are important, will that entire report be shared with the Intelligence and Security Committee so they can also oversee the changes that need to be made? On the issues around prisons and also around the PREVENT programme, the bomber repeatedly visited someone who was in prison for terrorist offences, and that did not trigger a further assessment, despite some of the wider things that were known about the bomber and his family. That does raise serious concerns. Will she look again at the process for monitoring prison visits, and will she accept the recommendations made by Sir John about the changes in approach to visits to terrorist and extremist prisoners that needs to be taken, and also his recommendations for changes to the law? Sir John also concludes it's highly likely that the bombers used a video online to help make the device in 2016. It is appalling that video was not taken down. It's also very troubling that 7 years on, we don't have the online safety bill on the statute. It also, though, raises the concerns about the lack of a proper strategy on online radicalisation. So can I urge her to urgently revise the countering extremism strategy, which is now 8 years out of date, despite her having received, or her predecessors having received, recommendations from the Countering Extremism Commissioner in 2018 that it was already out of date then? Will she urgently revise it to address online radicalisation? Sir John also warns about the potential indicator of extremism being violent misogyny in this particular case, and there are patterns here affecting different kinds of extremism: Islamist extremist, far-right extremist and incel extremist. So will she commission a review into what role violent misogyny may be playing and how far that should be understood as a potential indicator of extremism and radicalisation? Sir John also raises workforce pressures, particularly in the North-West. And given the new threats from hostile states, can she comment on what her assessment is of resources? And finally, in case the concerns were raised that the security services did not understand the threats from Libya sufficiently, and that was a wake-up call, will she recognise that shows the importance for them to continually reassess different threats and not to have any hierarchy of threats or extremism, but to pursue the evidence wherever it takes them? The Home Secretary raised the survivors, and we think of them. Many of them, however, still feel they lack the support and the help that they need, even so many years after the terrible, truly terrible things that have happened. Will she meet with survivors of terror, and will she look again as well at what further support can be provided for those who lost loved ones and those who were hurt in that terrible event?
Secretary.
I thank the Right Honourable Lady for her questions, which I will address in due course, and I agree entirely with her assessment that we must now all come together, the government, the security services and the emergency services, to learn the lessons of this awful tragedy and work to reduce the likelihood of future attacks. It was and it is a truly sad and terrible incident, but I want to reassure the public that our priority is to keep them safe. We must root out extremism wherever we find it and give no quarter to political correctness as we do so. We must respond quickly to all criticisms, but we must also recognise the serious work that has taken place since the attack. So, coming to some of the questions that she raised, in relation to Martin's Law, the government will publish draft legislation for scrutiny in the spring, and after that introduce a bill to the House as soon as parliamentary time allows. Its progression after that is dependent on the approval by Parliament and agreeing a date for its commencement, and there will be a lead-in time allowing for those captured to prepare. Martin's Law is one part of our extensive efforts across government, including those of the police and security services, to combat the threat of terrorism. There remains an extensive programme of guidance in place, which has been developed by security experts, counter-terrorism, policing and other partners to provide stakeholders and others responsible for public places with high quality advice. But I'm very much looking forward to moving forward with the solution and presenting the bill relating to Martin's Law. When it comes to prisons, we have published a new policy framework allowing greater scrutiny around contact between terrorist prisoners and the public. Our new approved contact scheme to be implemented this year will allow greater checks on visitors and phone contacts on those convicted of terrorist and terrorist-connected offences, regardless of the category of prison in which they are held. In relation to further prevention, there is a large amount of work that's been done since 2017 to support and improve the consistency of local authority prevent delivery and to manage the risks posed by subjects of interest. That includes additional funding and support for the highest priority areas, the publication of a prevent duty toolkit and the development of the multi-agency centre programme, and we're working across government to mitigate the risk posed by those about whom we have concern. And lastly, she asked about support for families going through this unimaginable process, and that's why I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister's announcement last week about the government's commitment to legislate as soon as possible to establish an independent public advocate to support victims through a major or following a major incident. The IPA will help victims to navigate the systems and the processes that may follow a major incident, such as the police investigations, the inquests and the inquiries. I hope it's not used ideally, but in the event of a tragedy, we will have resources, expertise and a proper structure in place to support families in this unimaginable situation. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know the whole House will join me. We must move forward now with the solution to ensure that our frameworks and our processes are as robust as possible so that we never see anything like this again.
Chair of the Intelligence and Security Committee, Sir Julian Lewis.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And on behalf of the ISC, I extend our deepest sympathy to the families and individuals so dreadfully affected by this terrorist act. I welcome the publication of the third volume of the Manchester Arena Inquiry Report and express strong appreciation for the work of the inquiry team. Of course, the committee will carefully consider the report and also Sir John Saunders' request that we should monitor the implementation of the inquiry's recommendations. In the meantime, does the government acknowledge and accept that the ISC is the only committee of Parliament equipped with both the facilities and the clearances fully to undertake this type of classified scrutiny?
Well, the chairman, Sir John Saunders, did make clear that he was determined that the recommendations are monitored, and he's made arrangements with the ISC to that effect. Volume 3 Open has only just been published, and the Volume 3 Closed recommendations have not yet been shared with the government. The government will carefully consider the report's findings and recommendations in full. We will also consider any recommendation that Sir John makes about the role of the ISC and the role that it can play in conjunction in light of the Memorandum of Understanding that exists between the committee and the government, and that MOU is available on the committee's website. But yes, effectively, the ISC is a very effective and secure forum in which, as has happened in the past, delivery on the back of these inquiries can be properly scrutinised.
SNP spokesperson Mari Black.
Here. Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The awful events on the 22nd of May 2017 led to the deaths of 22 innocent people and hundreds more being injured and affected for the rest of their lives. Now, of course, ultimate responsibility does lie with the bomber who detonated his homemade device in the foyer of Manchester Arena as the crowds left an Ariana Grande concert. Now, I welcome the fact that